Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by a grant from ODS Health Plans, the group medical plans that meet the needs of Oregonians by providing a broad range of medical and dental coverage and responsive service. And by the Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Warner in Washington.
And I'm Robert MacNeil in New York. After tonight's news summary, full details of today's subway bombing in New York. Next, Elizabeth Farnsworth reports on the latest judicial ruling on sexual harassment. Then a conversation with departing Democratic House Speaker Tom Foley, and Kansas City essayist Jim Fisher looks at one man's special Christmas gift.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. With ADM ingredients in thousands of consumer products, it's no wonder ADM is called Supermarket to the World. And by New York Life, yet another example of the wise investment philosophy New York Life has been following for the last 150 years. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
A firebomb exploded in a New York City subway today. At least 37 people were injured when the explosion occurred on a Manhattan train a few blocks from the World Trade Center. Most of those injured suffered burns or smoke inhalation. 4 people are critically injured. The explosion set off a ball of flame on the crowded car. New York City Police Commissioner William Bratton spoke about it at a City Hall news conference this afternoon.
At this juncture, based on the preliminary investigation by our forensics and explosives people at the train and on the platform, it would appear that the device involved in this explosion is what is described as an improvised incendiary device, IID, as opposed to an improvised explosive device. Difference being the incendiary device would cause a flame, and an explosive device would be much more severe physical damage or explosion.
They said the bomb appeared to be a glass jar filled with flammable liquid and had an external igniter. It was apparently on someone's lap when it exploded. Margaret?
North Korea today agreed to return the body of the U.S. Army pilot who was killed when his helicopter went down last weekend. North Korea's official news agency said the remains of pilot David Heilman were being released for humanitarian reasons. Heilman's crewmate, Officer Bobby Hall, is still being held by North Korea. The official news agency reported that the detained captain was in good health and would remain in custody until an official investigation was complete. U.S. Defense Secretary William Perry said today that North Korea was not justified in shooting down the helicopter. U.S. officials say it was on a routine training mission in South Korea when it strayed across the demilitarized zone into the north.
Russian forces continued to bomb the Chechen capital of Grozny today. They met little resistance as Chechen forces were almost out of ammunition. Several civilians died in an overnight bombing raid. President Yeltsin ordered fresh troops into the breakaway republic today. In Moscow, Russian Foreign Minister Kozyrev said the military action was necessary because criminal gangs had taken over the republic.
This is the problem, and especially in situation when the criminal does not hesitate to take and to use civilian population as hostages or as a shield to hide from the police. So that's the case in Chechnya. And unfortunately, there are casualties in civilian population. But again, the forces, the government forces, are doing all the best they can to avoid and to limit the casualties as much as it is conceivable and possible.
Russian President Yeltsin today promised economic help for the republic after Russian forces ousted its leader.
The Bosnian Serbs pounded the government-held enclave of Bihać today, 2 days before a Bosnia-wide ceasefire is supposed to begin. The Serbs attacked Bihać with missiles, mortars, and artillery. But UN officials say fighting in the northwest part of the country did ease later in the day with the onset of a heavy snowstorm. And they continued to express optimism that the ceasefire, negotiated by former President Jimmy Carter, would begin Friday as scheduled. Carter said today the warring sides had also agreed to release all prisoners that have been captured in the 2.5-year war.
President Clinton today designated 9 areas of the country to receive millions of dollars in tax breaks and other assistance to stimulate their economies. The so-called empowerment zones are in Atlanta, Baltimore, Chicago, Detroit, New York, and the Philadelphia, Camden, New Jersey area. 3 rural empowerment zones were declared in Kentucky, Mississippi, and Texas. More than 90 other communities will also receive some assistance. At a Washington news conference, the president said the programs will reduce the role of the federal government.
What we want to do is to empower people at the community level to make the most of their own lives by solving their problems and have the federal government be a support to them for a change and not a burden. I am especially proud of the fact that we have paid for these empowerment initiatives through reducing the size of the federal government, through getting rid of a lot of yesterday's government so we would have more of tomorrow's opportunity.
The man shot by police outside the White House yesterday has been charged with assault and resisting a federal officer. Marcelino Corneal was shot after he refused police demands to drop a hunting knife in his hand. Corneal remains in critical condition in a Washington hospital. If convicted, he faces a maximum penalty of 10 years in prison.
Former Secretary of State Dean Rusk died last night. Rusk was appointed by President Kennedy and remained in the post through the Johnson administration. Rusk helped shape U.S. policy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was also a firm defender of U.S. involvement in Vietnam. He died in Athens, Georgia, of congestive heart failure. He was 85.
That ends our summary of the day's top stories. Ahead on the NewsHour, the New York subway explosions, sexual harassment, House Speaker Tom Foley, and essayist Jim Fisher.
The explosion on a New York City subway train is our lead tonight. What appears to have been a firebomb injured at least 37 people on a crowded train in Lower Manhattan. It caused serious injury and created chaos for passengers underground. And it sent shockwaves through the city that 2 years ago was shaken by the World Trade Center bombing. The explosion occurred about 1:30 p.m. on a southbound train at the Fulton Street station in Lower Manhattan. Eyewitnesses described what happened.
The train pulled into the station. At the same time the doors opened, there was a popping sound at one end of the car. At the same time the popping sound occurred, flames shot across 2/3 of the length of the car from the northern end of the car, 2/3 of the way down the car to the southern end of the car, and there were people engulfed in flames.
I was in the front of the front of the train, and the conductor and everybody was running to the front, screaming that they were shooting, but there was no shooting because when everybody ran up the train, when we went back to see what had happened, I saw a whole bunch of smoke, and there was 3 people, the Chinese guy, a white guy, and a black man. I think the black guy, he was like halfway dead, I don't know. The Chinese guy, his whole body, everything was exploded, burnt up. All 3 of them was just burnt up badly. It was terrible. Everybody was just crying and screaming.
Most of the injured suffered from burns and smoke inhalation. Mayor Rudy Giuliani visited the scene an hour later. Then he and other city officials held a news conference.
The investigation is very much under the control of the New York City Transit Police and the New York City Police Department, and the sense that there was any other device or that it's connected to something else. At least at this point, there's no cause for alarm. And Alan Keeper and the chief will describe to you the resumption of service on the train, but I think that will happen pretty quickly. So let me ask the commissioner to bring you up to date, and then Chief O'Connor.
At this juncture, based on the preliminary investigation by our forensics and explosives people at the train and on the platform, it would appear that the device involved in this explosion is what is described as an improvised incendiary device, IID, as opposed to an improvised explosive device. Difference being the incendiary device would cause a flame, and an explosive device would be much more severe physical damage or explosion. So we have a device that apparently was ignited for some reason on the train after it had stopped in the station and the doors had opened. The damage to the train is, as you would expect from a flame, seared, smoke, charred, There was not physical damage in the sense of blown out windows or twisted metal, a device that gives off flame. It is at this time believed that the device may have consisted of what is described as some type of glass jar filled with some type of flammable liquid with an external igniter. And that is a very basic type of device. That's information that we have at this juncture. As the mayor has indicated, we have done a thorough search of that train, of that station. There were many items left behind as people fled the scene in confusion. We have checked all of those and have found no additional devices. We will be working very closely with the transit police. There is, fortunately, as of this juncture, been no deaths caused by this incident. The primary jurisdiction for the investigation will rest with the transit police, with assistance from the New York City police, and particularly our explosives people.
For more on the story, we're joined by Robert McGuire, the former police commissioner for the city of New York. He's currently the president of Kroll Associates, a New York-based investigative and security company. He's joined by Neil Livingston, an author of several books on terrorism. He runs the Institute on Subnational Conflict, a Washington-based think tank. Mr. McGuire, what can you add to what we've heard?
Well, it would appear, Robin, that it is not a terrorist incident. There were no messages received. There were no second threats. The city is getting back to normal. They've restarted the subway system. So I think, in a sense, it's reassuring. It's a horrible reflection on our society that we have these kinds of incidents. There was a similar incident last week with some young high school students carrying an incendiary device in a train, and they were both severely injured. I do believe that the authorities will be able to reconstruct this with some certainty, and unless the device was left, which doesn't sound the way it happened, they will be able to identify the individual carrying this device.
It sounds as though it went off with somebody holding it.
That is correct. So they should be, that person was in all likelihood severely injured.
Well, how seriously are they taking the similarity with the bomb or the explosive device that went off with the two teenagers last week?
Well, my information is they're checking it because of the similarity of the devices, but I think they're in the very early stages of this investigation.
We just heard one of the eyewitnesses said the flames shot halfway down the car. That is some device. I mean, it doesn't sound like a simple glass jar that somebody would make and put some gasoline in it.
Well, you also have the fact that it's contained, but you are absolutely right. You have 35, 37 people severely burned and injured. This was a major league device.
New York's Governor-elect George Pataki issued a statement this afternoon calling this an act of terrorism. You don't think it looks like an act of terrorism?
It doesn't have the normal signs of a terrorist act, and I think, again, one can't prejudge these things. One of the things you'll learn in law enforcement is you wait until all the facts have been obtained before you make any judgment. But it doesn't have the normal indicia of a terrorist act.
Yeah. Mr. Livingston, let's ask you on that. Is this the kind of device you would associate with any known terrorist or terrorist organizations?
Well, a number of terrorist organizations around the world have used incendiaries, including the Irish Republican Army, which would leave them in department stores and so on around Belfast and other parts of Northern Ireland. But I agree with very much of what Mr. McGuire has said today. There are a lot of reasons I think we would initially worry that this might be a terrorist act. Its proximity to the World Trade Center, the fact that this is the anniversary of the downing of Pan Am 103, the very fact that we've had any number of threats against the United States over the past many months saying if we put Sheikh Rahman on trial, one of the people involved in the earlier conspiracy, the July 4th conspiracy in New York, that there would be further attacks. But as the evidence comes in, while we can't rule out anything at all right now, I tend to think, too, that this was probably an unrelated, non-political act.
The trial of the Sheikh and others in the conspiracy is due to begin shortly, is it not, in Manhattan?
That's right. It's had a number of delays. It was supposed to start in September. Now it will be after the first of the year. But U.S. intelligence has picked up repeated threats that have been made that have emanated from the Middle East, saying that if we proceed with this trial against Sheikh Rahman and his followers, that there will be attacks. But this doesn't look like one right now.
Is that a possibility that the police, one of the possibilities the police thought of immediately today? Did they start fanning out and looking for other possible sites and things like that immediately, or did
well, they have a game plan that they implement. This was very personal to me because I was on a train about 20 minutes behind this train, and we were diverted. And I know when I heard about it, my immediate reaction was, this sounds like a terrorist act, and it is one of the things law enforcement is concerned about, because we cannot protect the city, the subways any better than we can protect the streets in terms of terrorist activity. You can protect airports and planes much, much better. So it is something that concerns law enforcement. I think they probably began to implement their emergency procedures and then sort of ratchet back when they found out.
Emergency procedures being to maybe just be extra surveillance at airports or train stations or big things like that?
Well, you start activating the terrorist task force, and so you have an investigative phase as well as a street phase where you really start looking for suspects, looking for other devices, worrying about whether there are any other devices in the subway system itself.
Mr. Livingston, you're familiar with the sort of database that's kept on all these things. What kind of people use improvised incendiary devices?
Well, a lot of groups use them. Unfortunately, some of them are very easy to make, and we have the only publishing industry in the world, in the United States, that will sell you a bomb-making manual through the mail that will tell you how to make an incendiary device or a bomb. And as a consequence, we've got kids making these things, and we've also got a lot of hate groups. And some of those terrorists that were involved in the World Trade Center bombing had diagrams on how to make homemade or improvised explosive devices. Some of those diagrams are very, very close to things that have been published in some of these manuals in the United States.
Yeah. Is it something you would associate this kind of thing with an amateur or a professional?
Well, this sounds like an amateur, but somebody with enough sophistication, as Neil said, to read a manual and then improvise. This is not somebody who has no understanding. There apparently was an igniter. If it was an external igniter, it might have been battery operated. So there's a certain primitive level of sophistication that you have to have.
It's been mentioned this afternoon that some gangs have begun to use things like this. Do you have any knowledge of that?
Well, I am concerned, and I think that that's one of the things the police department will be looking at. For example, these two young people last week, this device exploded apparently accidentally. I started to think about the fact that this could be the next level in terms of school violence and teenage violence in the neighborhoods, where they're going to start using devices. They have used Molotov cocktails, as you know, which are very similar to what we're talking about here, but less powerful.
So that wouldn't be political terrorism. That would be what? What would you call that?
Urban terrorism. I mean, a form of terrorism that, in many senses, impacts on people much more dramatically than the sporadic terrorist attacks.
Yeah. Mr. Livingston, do you have any observation on that?
Unfortunately, we're seeing an escalation of the firepower of gangs and people in our cities around the nation. As I travel around and meet with police departments and law enforcement officials, the one thing I've been struck by for the last number of years is everyone has commented on the increasing sophistication of what we're seeing: bombs, pipe bombs, even hand grenades. And so it's not very much of a stretch of one's imagination to think that they might actually start manufacturing devices like this. On the other hand, this might be just a mafia hitman on his way to torch a building in the Bronx or something, and the device went off prematurely. We just don't have enough information right now.
Does that have plausibility to you, that hypothesis? It could be an organized crime hitman?
Very remote.
Very remote.
And he wouldn't be going to the Bronx because the train was going the other way, but I understand what Neil is saying, and I think it would be very remote in this case, that it was the mafia. The organized crime folks usually don't use these kind of devices. They're more used to shooting people.
Well, Commissioner McGuire, Mr. Livingston, thank you both for joining us. Margaret?
Still ahead, sexual harassment in the office, House Speaker Tom Foley, and one man's special gift. Next, the high price of sexual harassment. A legal secretary in San Francisco stands to receive $3.5 million in her case against the world's largest law firm. Correspondent Elizabeth Farnsworth reports on the fallout.
This shouldn't have happened. This is a guy who is a supervisor of a department, a big department in this firm, and it shouldn't have happened.
In the trial last summer, Secretary Rena Weeks described several encounters with her boss, Martin Greenstein, a prominent patent attorney in the Palo Alto office of the world's largest law firm, Baker & McKenzie.
I felt Mr. Greenstein pulling me back and putting his arm over my shoulder into my left breast pocket and emptying something in it. And then he grabbed me from behind in both my arms in a tight arm lock, and he put his knee in my lower back and pulled me back. My leg went up. He pulled me back and he said, "Let's see which breast is bigger."
Martin Greenstein denied most of this, but after 6 other women testified that he had also harassed them at Baker & McKenzie, the pattern was clear.
Then I felt him suddenly with his hands on my hips, pressing his body into mine into the desk.
In the end, Greenstein admitted he may have done some of the things some of the women claimed.
I did it out of what I view now as a very misguided sense of humor. I was trying to be funny. I totally missed the mark. I understand now more about myself, and I certainly understand now how comments like that can be very distressing to people, and I don't do that now.
The jury awarded Rena Weeks $50,000 for emotional distress, for which Greenstein and the law firm are each liable. She also got $225,000 in punitive damages to be paid by Martin Greenstein and $6.9 million to be paid by Baker & McKenzie. That figure was later reduced to $3.5 million by the judge. But it is still the nation's largest verdict awarded to an individual in a sexual harassment case. Baker & McKenzie chairman John McGuigan had testified that the firm's officers didn't have enough information to take action against Greenstein, but the jury didn't buy that argument. Juror Jeff Van Dyke is a civil engineer in San Francisco.
You got to ask yourself, if you're in charge of a situation, you're responsible for a situation, you see something wrong going on, and you don't take action, is that as serious an offense as if you're committing the action yourself, if you're responsible for the situation? They should have seen the pattern, and I know that some of them did see the pattern, and they chose either actively or passively not to do anything about it.
I have to say, as a plaintiff's attorney, that one case probably increased the value of all my sexual harassment cases by at least 20 or 25% at a minimum. The most important thing, I think, about that case is the message it gives that the employer has very significant duties and obligations to respond once they're aware of some kind of sexual harassment.
Attorney Barbara Bryant represents plaintiffs in sexual harassment cases and teaches a course on it at the University of California's Boalt Law School. She teamed up with defense attorney Theodora Lee earlier this month in a seminar in Oakland about sexual harassment for lawyers who represent a wide variety of clients.
In some ways, a lot of people now know generally what sexual harassment is and that you're not supposed to do it, but employers aren't as aware yet how serious their obligation is to do something about it.
Employers have to wake up and take heed that sexual harassment is serious and you're going to get hit. From a defense perspective, I think the jury was way out of line in the verdict that they provided. I mean, it was almost 2 times the amount that the plaintiffs had requested.
I've been practicing all these years in many firms. I've never once seen any sexual harassment. In any firm I practice with, nobody ever complained about it. How far do we go with these things? I think it's ridiculous. I think this whole line of legality here, to me personally, is obscene.
As an employment lawyer representing management, I have a concern that the standard is moving toward a subjective one and less of an objective one. But it is a problem in society that I, as a woman, can understand.
What I see from my perspective, much more than the cases that shouldn't be brought, are all the people that are being harassed in the employment setting who never complain, who never go to human resources or they do and not much is done. And they just leave that job setting and they go to a new job setting.
Jadra Bracco left a job because of sexual harassment. She and 2 other legal secretaries, each of whom works as a temp, gathered in San Francisco to discuss their experiences.
Even though I think we tend to minimize our own experiences because we handled them, you know, one way or another. We left the job or dealt with the person. But there are a lot of women that maybe feel a little more vulnerable or not as assertive and are suffering.
You never know what you're going to hit when you walk in that door when you're doing a new assignments day to day. You don't know who you're playing with, you know, and it could go from, you know, the most wonderful, nicest people in the world that you could possibly meet to monsters.
Each of these women applauded the verdict in the Baker and McKenzie case.
So this is very, very good. And it's just wonderful to see justice being done, you know.
I think it, like you say, raised the awareness level profoundly. But, you know, you got to applaud her courage.
One of the positive outcomes of cases like this is that women's perception of sexual harassment directed toward themselves has been legitimized.
Exactly.
I think it's less and less the case that when you do go and make a complaint to someone that it's not listened to.
Right.
In workplaces all over America, people are trying to figure out exactly what constitutes sexual harassment. It's been a high-profile debate since 1991 when Anita Hill charged that Supreme Court nominee Clarence Thomas had harassed her. According to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the number of cases has more than doubled since then.
She said you sexually harassed her.
She harassed me.
Get back here and you finish what you started or you're dead. Do you hear me?
The issue of sexual harassment has entered popular culture in a major way, too. It's the topic of the recently released movie Disclosure, which is based on Michael Crichton's best-selling novel.
Get down to business. Wait.
In the film, a Seattle executive played by Michael Douglas is seduced by his boss, portrayed by actress Demi Moore. Afterwards, she claims he sexually harassed her. It's not a typical sexual harassment story. Most cases involve men as the perpetrators. But the film does point out the relationship between sexual harassment and abuse of power.
Sexual harassment is not about sex. It is about power.
In the real world, sexual harassment is often very difficult to define. Defense attorney Mary Roberts served as an expert witness for plaintiff Rena Weeks in the Baker and McKenzie trial. Okay, so a guy comes up and says to somebody working here, honey, how was your sex life this weekend? Is that sexual harassment?
Again, that is inappropriate, offensive, and if it keeps up, if it becomes pervasive, it could very well constitute a hostile environment based on sexual.
So once might not be sexual harassment.
Lots of cases that say once is not enough, that isolated incidents or sporadic incidents of inappropriate conduct of a sexual nature is not enough to constitute a sexually hostile work environment.
Some guy comes up and goes, how are you doing today? And does that 2 or 3 times a week. Is that sexual harassment?
Probably not. Probably not. This is not, sexual conduct. Now, if at the same time he's groping you, you know, that's pretty offensive, and that would cross over that line a whole lot faster than if it were just talk. When you start touching, you do have to be a little more careful. But you know, some people really are much more touchy-feely. You know, hi, how are you? Did you have a good weekend? You know, and presumably, if it's same sex, it's not going to be as much of an issue as if it were, you know, male superior to female subordinate.
What about dirty jokes?
What about them? They're pretty stupid. They're pretty offensive. Do they belong in the workplace? No. Is it sexual harassment? Well, you have to look at the context in which it occurred. You know, there would be some work environments, I bet, where trading sexual jokes is not unwelcome conduct, where that's part of, you know, the fun, juvenile as it may be, of being in the workplace.
Robert says that some kinds of sexual harassment are more easily identified, requiring sex in return for work benefits, for example. But she believes the costs of handling these cases have gotten out of hand.
Well, it would be very helpful if the legislature would step in and address these issues, because the way it's being handled now, that is on a case-by-case basis in front of juries, is not just real inefficient, it's incredibly costly on all levels.
The Rena Weeks, Baker and McKenzie story isn't over yet. Baker and McKenzie chairman John McGuigan says the law firm will appeal the verdict, arguing, among other points, that the damages are still too high. He spoke with correspondent Elizabeth Brackett at the firm's headquarters in Chicago.
I think, and we think, the whole arena of punitive damages is such that, quite frankly, I almost feel we've got an obligation to appeal.
What do you think now about the status of the sexual harassment law in the United States?
I think there is a risk, because of the uncertainty, because of the ambiguity, that what the law is seeking to achieve may, in fact, in a perverse way, operate in reverse.
How?
That the normal employer-employee relationships between men and women are somehow being viewed in an overly structured fashion, in a way which does not facilitate the sort of working relationships that one needs.
I think it's very simple, and it's not confusing at all. It's a question of what you were taught as a child. Keep your hands to yourself and treat people with dignity and respect. That's all sexual harassment law is.
Philip Kay is Rena Weeks' attorney. He defends the punitive damages in this case as punishment for Baker and McKenzie.
Because the real villain, if there's a villain in this case, is not Mr. Greenstein. It was the partners of Mr. Greenstein who sat by year after year knowing that he was doing these things. The reason that the Supreme Court of the United States has routinely upheld punitive damages is because they serve an important public function. Without them, people will continue to carry out bad acts and feel immune from any type of retribution.
Rena Weeks and Martin Greenstein declined interviews pending the appeal. Weeks has been working as a preschool teacher, and Greenstein is practicing law in San Jose. Their lives have been irrevocably changed, and their case could change the American workplace.
Next tonight, a conversation with the outgoing Speaker of the House, Tom Foley. He served in the House of Representatives for 30 years on behalf of the 5th District of the state of Washington. As Speaker for the past 5 years, he led a Democratic majority in Congress, first as an adversary to President Bush, and more recently as a stalwart defender of the Clinton administration. Tom Foley lost his seat last month in the midterm elections that gave Republicans control of Congress for the first time in 40 years. He joins us now. Welcome, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.
What do you think as you watch Newt Gingrich, even before he's taken power, changing this institution of Congress that you've served in for so long?
Well, some of the things he's doing I approve of. I tried myself to enhance a bit the power of the Speaker's office. I think that's a needed effort in the House. The Speaker of the House of Representatives has not been as powerful a figure as many speakers in state legislatures are. And while you don't want a czar speaker, I think you do need a speaker who has both the authority and capacity to undertake the direction of the House and to be responsible for seeing that the members' rights are protected and so forth. So in that sense, I think he's continuing an effort that I made. For example, I succeeded in getting authority to virtually appoint the officers of the House, to recommend them to the Democratic caucus, also, I think with the Steering and Policy Committee to have, along with the other members of the leadership, some influence on committee appointments. He's carrying a bit farther, doing some things that I think perhaps may not be wise. In the last Congress, we developed a plan to allow a joint appointment of a non-legislative administrator of the House to take care of all the sort of business activities of the House, jointly appointed by me, by Dick Gephardt as Democratic leader, and by Bob Michel as Republican leader. I thought that was a bipartisan way of approaching the administration of the House. Speaker Gingrich has decided that he wants to take it back under his authority and to make the appointment directly. That may not be bad. It depends on how it's carried out, of course. But it does move away from a kind of a bipartisan development I thought was healthy.
Well, he does seem to be taking steps, though, that seem designed to send a message to the American public that Congress is changing. For instance, saying that committee chairman will have a limited tenure as chairman, or not even automatically following seniority in appointing chairman. I mean, do you think that's healthy? Do you think the American public's right when they're saying that kind of thing needs to be shaken up?
Well, I'm not a great fan of term limits, as most people know, but frankly, in most cases, a committee chairman seldom served for longer than 6 years, or sometimes 10 years. There were changes. This House of Representatives today has a turnover that is much greater than most people imagine. For example, something like a majority of all the members of the Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, were elected in the 1990s. And a majority of the Republican Party, almost 60%, were elected this year or 2 years from ago. So, you know, there's a fairly rapid turnover.
Well, are you saying then that what Newt Gingrich is doing really isn't that revolutionary?
I'm saying a lot of this has happened before. For example, one of the reforms that we put in place in the 70s was to elect committee chairmen by secret ballot so that members had control. We passed over seniority time and time again in doing that. Seniority has been a custom and a trend, but not an absolute rule. It's never been in the rules of the House, ever. It's more of a custom. And again, where exceptions were made, and I think, I don't want to take anything away from what he has said and done and announced, but for example, one of the things that was asked early on after the election was, what's the first thing that the new Republican Congress is going to do? And the answer was, we're going to apply by rule the same laws that apply to the rest of the Congress to the country. We're going to do that by rule, and then we're going to try to pass legislation. Last year, we passed legislation in the House to do that. We passed a conference report to do that. It didn't pass the Senate, and we applied. On October 7th of this year, we applied the rules that apply to the rest of the country to Congress. I'm just saying that it's not all of that isn't revolutionary. It's happened before.
But with all due respect, Mr. Speaker, a number of the Democrats who were freshmen in 1992 say that they pushed you to do much of this kind of thing, and you really resisted them. And it was only in the 11th hour, for instance, this one thing passed. I mean, Eric Fingerhut, who is a congressman, as you know, or was a congressman from Ohio, wrote a pretty angry piece to the New York Times on Saturday, blaming you and other members of the Democratic leadership for misreading the 92 election and being too slow to change. Do you think there's anything to that?
No, frankly, I was surprised by that letter because Eric Fingerhut came to me on several occasions and thanked me for supporting reforms in the House. The reform of applying the laws of the rest of the country was sponsored by two members of Congress, Mr. Shea from Connecticut and Mr. Sweat, a Democrat and a Republican, Republican and Democrat in that order. We not only passed it in the House, but when the conference report was on the floor, I was given credit by the New York Times for having pushed personally on the floor the passage of it. And member after member came over to see me, including Mr. Fingerhut, and thanked me for those efforts. We passed bills in plenty of time to be adopted, but the Republicans in the Senate filibustered even the appointment of a conference committee on campaign reform. Having said all that, let me just review a bit what happened in my tenure as Speaker. We had the end of the House Bank, the end of patronage hiring in the Congress. The post office was put under the most professional management. Never been a hint of scandal for the time that has happened. We adopted a policy of non-partisan appointment of the administrator, put the House on a business-like basis, passed campaign reform, passed lobbying reform, passed the House, and also, as I say, we applied by rule the Shea-Sweat legislation. Now, having said all that, most of the concern has been expressed around campaign finance reform. This has been opposed by Republicans who do not favor at least any limits on campaign spending. But suppose we had passed campaign reform. Is that what this election was about, the failure to pass campaign finance reform? I think it's important to do, but it shows up at the very bottom of most lists of public concern.
So in other words, you really totally reject the criticism that you were slow on the reform, on the congressional reform issue.
They died in the Senate, not in the House. They were passed by the House. We passed them in plenty of time to become law. And I don't think this election, frankly, was about the failure to pass particularly campaign reform, much as I favor it.
All right, let's turn back to Speaker-to-be Newt Gingrich. As the networks know, nobody's a better guide to a football game than someone who's just left the field, a former player, whatever. So play Don Madden for us here. Give us an idea of what these first 100 days will look like.
Well, I think they intend to bring up, and the so-called contract in America, they've said that. I think it was, if I may say so, a little disingenuous to say that the only promise they made was to vote on it.
Which is what the contract says,
Yeah,
not they don't promise to pass it.
Implication is that we didn't vote on these things before. We have, as a Democratic Congress, brought up and voted on balanced budget amendments several times. Didn't pass them, but we voted on them. We voted on such things as a line item veto before and so on. I think the commitment is to pass them. I assume that's what the commitment is. And they may have the votes to do that. We will see. They're certainly going to probably make an effort in that direction. I don't think they'll be able to pass all of them. For example, I doubt very much, just a prediction, that the Supreme Court will sustain term limits in the states that have adopted them. And after the Supreme Court declares them unconstitutional, it will be very relevant as whether there are votes for a constitutional amendment to pass a constitutional amendment on term limits. I don't think that will pass. May pass the House, but don't think it will pass the Senate.
And why? Do you think because now that the Republicans are in power, they're not going to want term
Well,
limits?
I think when it comes down to actually having an opportunity to pass it, when we look at the time that many of these members have been in office and the time that I think they hope to serve, I'm not sure. Perhaps I'll be thought to be cynical to suggest that it was good as an issue. It would not particularly be welcomed as a law.
What kind of a speaker do you think Newt Gingrich will be? Does he have the qualities it takes to be a great Speaker of the House?
Oh, I think so. I think he has the capacities to be a great speaker. Only history judges that. He has an intelligence, I think a scope of historical understanding. He has said himself that his first task is to recognize, this is what he himself says, that in assuming this responsibility, he's Speaker of the whole House, not just of Republican members, that he's not alone a Republican political leader, but that constitutional officer that's second in succession to the presidency of the United States and has a responsibility to the whole House. Frankly, I think there has been a tendency of some Republicans, I don't want to get into particular names, but I think there's been a tendency of some Republicans to try to use denigration of the institution of the House of Representatives as a means of achieving power. And I think that, frankly, with the press coverage and with other things, the House has, as an institution, has been subjected to excessive criticism. Not that it should be not criticized, it should be, particularly when there are legitimate problems in the operation of the House, that ought to be subject to public scrutiny and criticism. But I think as a political device of kind of bringing the House in disrepute in order to effect a change in the majority, there's been a policy on some quarters of doing that. Beyond that, individual Democrats, as well as Republican members, have sometimes used their own attack on the House as a kind of a foil against their own better service. I hope that comes to an end. And now with Republican leadership in the House and the Senate, there will be no political reason, in fact, the political reason to the contrary, to support rather than to attack the institution of the House. Because I think as I leave this position, one of the things that worries me or concerns me is that in recent years, while people have had a confidence and an esteem for their own individual members, actually they have to get elected, they have to have that confidence in some fundamental way, the institution has come into disrepute, and far more than I think is justified. And beyond that, I think it denigrates the most, small d, democratic of our political institutions. Other countries have elected presidents. Other countries have constitutional courts. And the Senate, after all, represents fundamentally the states, the Union of States. This is the people's body, the House of Representatives. And I think the overwhelming number of members who serve here, Democrats and Republicans, try very hard under a very serious opportunity and honor to represent the people that send them there. And I think the institution may, I hope, improve in public confidence in the future.
So that's an irony. You're saying that with the Republicans taking over, you think some of this tearing down will stop, actually.
If you're in command of the ship, at least for a time, you have to declare it seaworthy and fit and so on. I think that will happen.
Okay, now what if you were quarterbacking the Democrats remaining in the Congress now? How do you think they should approach the next 100 days?
Well, they have very strong leadership. Dick Gephardt is a great leader. He was in previous Congresses. And the whip, Dave Bonnier, and all the others are just extraordinary people. But the party as a whole was once described by Tip O'Neill as being a party so diverse that if it were a European political party, it would be 5 political parties, Tip said. It's a little easier when you have a majority to have a bit of looseness about how you work together, and some people want to go in this direction, others want to go in that direction, and you can kind of accommodate more easily that kind of sort of diversity. When you're in minority, you need to work together to get as much of a cohesive and comprehensible position so that the voice of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives needs to be clear, it needs to be fairly understandable, and that is a task for Democrats that are sort of accustomed a bit to going their own way. Now, when, quite frankly, parties look at this thing differently, when Republicans talk about their unity, they say it's a unity of conviction, it's a unity of principle. When the Democrats are unified, they often accuse us of being unified by force or threats or leadership pressures or whatever. But the only way you get a kind of an effective minority position in the Congress is to be, first of all, within your own party, consulting about where you want to stand and what issues you want to emphasize and what positions you want to take. I think that will happen, and I think the Democratic Party is going to be more organized and more unified and have a clearer expression of its traditional values in minority, ironically, than perhaps it was during the time we were in majority. And that'll be the chief means by which we again become the majority party in the House of Representatives and the Senate.
But what are those values? Dave McCurdy, former head or outgoing head of the Democratic Leadership Council, gave a speech last week in which he said the Democratic Party faced a crisis of values, that it had an internal identity crisis. Do you think that's true? I mean, which Democratic Party are you talking about here?
Well, the Democratic Party, I think, has fundamentally found its identity in representing not only those in the society that are disadvantaged, and that's a task that it's undertaken, and I think it's been a great and important role for the Democratic Party, but also for the great sort of middle class of America, the people who work hard every day and who depend upon their own efforts and to pay the taxes and so forth. They're not people who have in recent years had most of the tax breaks. They're not the people in recent years who enjoyed most of the income growth. And I think speaking for that sort of great and important middle class is what the Democratic Party's present task is. We haven't communicated even to those who we traditionally look to as their representatives that clearly enough. And I think the important responsibility now is to regain that commitment to the welfare and the future of that great middle class, as well as continuing our concern for the poor and the disadvantaged.
And you think the party can do both?
I think they can do both of those things. And I think, frankly, one has to remember the Democratic Party is the oldest political party, not only in this country, it's the oldest political party in the parliamentary world. There's no party in England or any other parliamentary nation that's lasted as long as the Democratic Party. Why is that? Because I think, well, we've made mistakes, as every political party has. We've had confusions and problems that fundamentally it's tried to speak for people of all regions of the country, for people of all backgrounds and circumstances, but particularly for the broad middle class of the nation. And I think they'll recapture those values, the values of economic growth and advantage for everyone, the values of protecting the individual rights of citizens. I think those values will come forward. And obviously we need to emphasize again some of the fundamental concerns that people have today about the protection of family rights and values and the restoration of traditional respect for law and for society that have in many cases been weakened in our country and are the source of concern for many Americans. We're going through a period of change in this country, and I think the Democratic Party needs to reemphasize its traditional values and to speak more effectively and clearly about them.
I'm afraid we're running out of time, but before we go, just tell us briefly, what are you going to be doing?
Well, I'm finished my service as an elected official, and I finished that with great gratitude to the citizens of the 5th District who have allowed me to serve as their representative for 30 years, and to my colleagues who have allowed me to serve in 3 Congresses as Speaker. I wouldn't forego the opportunity perhaps in the future of serving in some appointed position. In the meantime, I'm probably going to return to the practice of law and do some speaking and writing, and I'll be an interested observer of the Congress, and I wish it well, not both as an institution and to all of my colleagues in both parties as members.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and we wish you well.
Thank you very much.
Finally tonight, essayist Jim Fisher of the Kansas City Star has a story about a different kind of Christmas gift.
This is Smith County, Kansas, home of the geographical center of the United States, where Home on the Range was written. The land's dormant now, the fall harvest over, long vistas, empty fields. The county seats Smith Center, where 2,200 souls shop, make trips to the banks, visit over coffee each morning at the donut shop. It's Christmas time on Main Street, special this year, since Smith County's about to receive one of the biggest gifts any town this size could dream of. A $1 million community center is now in the final phases of construction, a place for senior citizens, recreation, weddings and banquets, reunions, and a new library. $1 million bucks? Not much these days when billions are the coin of the realm. But out here in rural America, where people have to scratch their heads to remember any construction project other than a school, $1 million is a very big deal indeed. All thanks to old Milt Schrader, dead since 1989, who left the money for this center and whose name graces the building. This is Milt as a young man, one reared in Smith County, but who wanted nothing to do with the forbidding land. He made tracks out of here as quick as he could and joined the carnival. Eventually, he became a carnival owner, bringer of wonder to other small towns just like Smith Center. When his carnival came to town, so did things people never imagined. Freak shows and their attendant crowds to marvel at the bearded fat lady or the dog-faced girl, the strong men who fascinated legions of farm boys, the contortionist who could turn himself into a pretzel, even a chance to test your strength and impress your girl. Carnivals weren't church socials. There was something fairly licentious about them. But where else did people swallow swords with ease, or a man throw dozens of knives at a woman lashed to a board? Milt became something now rare. A showman who would hit town, light up part of it for one night, and then move on. A carny. Banker Linton Lull describes Milt.
From the time that he got involved, he was a true old carny, yes.
Tough?
Tough, rough, rugged, a few character flaws, but...
Such as?
Gambling was a little vice. Drinking was an occasional vice, but very typical, I think, of the early day in the carny business.
And so how did he saved his money, didn't he? Was a saver, or?
Through gambling, he was often well-to-do and lots of times hard up.
And during the tough times, Smith County folks took care of one of their own, says banker Bill Martin.
The story, and it may be legend, but it's well known in these parts, is that in the 20s he was down and out and had his carnival in Oregon. And it was rainy, and the rainy weather was washing out the carnival and business was bad and times were tough. And that some of the community members sent care packages up to that area. So that got him through that tight spot. He was able to go ahead and go through those tough times with the help of people from the county.
Legend or not, it's a great story. And maybe it is the reason Milt left his money to Smith County. Let the state or the feds get hold of his money? No way, not Milt. But leave it to hometown folks, Milt could buy into that. It was a matter of trust. Jim Bush, an attorney who helped Milt draw his will, sees what's happened as sort of a Christmas story.
It's kind of like it's a wonderful life, I guess. It's a typical story of a community pulling together. All kinds of volunteers have just been coming out of the woodwork to help out, and can't think of what would be a better Christmas story.
So now it's all come full circle. Kids lining up to move books into the new library. Their eager faces, ones who can seize on the dreams and wonder contained in a legacy of brick and mortar left by old Milt. And not just for a night either, maybe for a lifetime.
Last book.
I'm Jim Fisher.
Once again, the top stories of this Wednesday. A firebomb exploded on a New York City subway near the World Trade Center. At least 37 people were injured. North Korea agreed to release the body of the U.S. Army pilot killed when his helicopter crossed the Korean border. Defense Secretary William Perry said last weekend's downing of the helicopter by North Korean forces was not justified. And former President Jimmy Carter said Bosnian Serb and government forces have agreed to release all prisoners captured in the Bosnian Civil War. Good night, Robin.
Good night, Margaret. That's the NewsHour for tonight, and we'll see you again tomorrow night. I'm Robert MacNeil. Good night.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by the Archer Daniels Midland Company. With ADM ingredients in thousands of consumer products, it's no wonder ADM is called Supermarket to the World. And by New York Life, yet another example of the wise investment philosophy New York Life has been following for the last 150 years. And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
Video cassettes of the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for the MacNeil-Lehrer NewsHour has been provided by a grant from ODS Health Plans, the group medical plans that meet the needs of Oregonians by providing a broad range of medical and dental coverage and responsive service. And by the Collins Foundation. The Collins Foundation is dedicated to improving the quality of life in Oregon.
Ever wonder how the big guy spends his off hours?
Wonder what he does with the other 364 days.
How about a nice little vacation?
France, land of culture and civilization. Scotland, best water in the world. Las Vegas.
Spend more than just Christmas Eve. Spend a whole year with Father Christmas.